Horror games have been frightening players for years. From the psychological horror players endured in Silent Hill P.T., the stress-inducing soundscape of Dead Space, to the action-packed scenes of Resident Evil 4, these games have used all of the tools at their disposal to horrify and send players deep into fear. The horror genre and its subgenres have evolved over the years, and developers have discovered what formulas work and what falls flat. And technological advances in graphics and sound now offer the player a deeper level of immersion than ever before. But going back to the beginning of horror games, without much knowledge of what strikes fear in the player's heart, how did early game developers approach creating a horror game? And how did early horror game devs achieve the same sense of unease without the capabilities of contemporary technology? Today, we're going back to the days of early horror games to find out. And it may not look exactly how you'd think. Let's bring it back to 1972. The first ever at-home video game console was released, the Magnavox Odyssey. To play a game, you insert a circuit card, kind of like a cartridge, into the console. But what was unique about these circuit cards is that the same programming was used for multiple games. The console relied on physical props such as mylar overlays and accessories like poker chips and dice to change the gaming experience, without changing the program itself. With the addition of these accessories, playing on the Odyssey was a bit of a mix between a video game and a board game. With the Odyssey's release came the release of one of the earliest horror-themed games, Haunted House. To supplement the graphics and to bolster the Haunted House theme, the team created a mylar overlay for the TV screen. The design of this overlay wasn't particularly scary, and it kind of reminded me of a Scooby-Doo approach to a horror theme. The frightening aspects of the overlay include a few spiders, some skeletons, and an angry cat here and there. This game takes inspiration from hide and seek. One player is assigned the role of detective, and the other is assigned the role of ghost. While the detective closes their eyes in the real world, the ghost hides within the haunted house. After the ghost is safely hidden, the detective must open their eyes and start wandering the haunted house for clues, in hopes to eventually reach the treasure hidden in the attic. The Magnavox Odyssey didn't have any sound capabilities, so the developers had to get creative if they wanted to incorporate any sound. If they couldn't create the sound themselves, why not have the player create it for them? Just before the detective reaches the ghost's hiding spot, the ghost must pop out and say, "Boo!" Pretty scary, right? Though Haunted House was not particularly immersive by today's standards, given the technological capabilities of the time, it still created a fun experience for the player by blending in real life and on-screen action. While the Odyssey's Haunted House took more of a family-friendly approach to a horror theme, the 1976 arcade game Death Race did the exact opposite. Death Race is an early reverse horror game. The player takes on the role of the antagonist, and their one objective is to run over and kill as many gremlins as possible. When the player successfully kills a gremlin, they're replaced by a tombstone, and the tombstone is now an obstacle to avoid on the racetrack. So what makes this game scary? The developers decided to take a violent and frightening concept and turn that into the game. The player feels a bit of adrenaline when chasing down these creatures on the racetrack, and also a sense of accomplishment after completing the difficult task that the game has set out for the player to accomplish. And depending on the player and how much thought they put to the violent theme, it may induce a frightening moral quandary about violence. But this game also created a different kind of fear, and one the developers may have never intended. The fear that this type of violence may creep into real life. Because graphics were so limited at the time, these gremlins look suspiciously like humans. And add that to the fact that the game's working title was Pedestrian, you get a media storm. The game inspired a slew of articles in local papers and the New York Times, and even garnered a special on 60 Minutes. But it also garnered concern from the National Safety Council. Dr. Gerald Dreesen, manager of the National Safety Council's research department at the time, and a behavioral psychologist, said in an interview, "On TV, Violence is passive. In this game, a player takes the first step in creating violence. The player is no longer just a spectator. He is an actor in the process. Ironically, this controversy only increased demand for Death Race. Flash forward to 1978 and the launch of Space Invaders. This shoot-'em-up game seems fairly straightforward. Shoot the invading aliens before they have a chance to land on Earth and avoid getting hit. But knowing that the graphics aren't particularly fear or stress-inducing, the developers added one thing: the soundtrack. Composed by designer Tomohiro Nishikado, this game is one of the first to have a continuous background soundtrack. The music itself is fairly simple. It's just 4 notes on a descending minor scale. But as the aliens increase their speed and get closer and closer to Earth, the tempo also increases. This increase in musical tempo is designed to induce panic in the player, as the stakes perpetually rise. On top of this, a mystery ship whirs across the top of the screen with a really loud and startling siren noise, which serves just to put the player even more on edge. Finally, when the player's in the home stretch with only one alien remaining, this alien increases speed seemingly exponentially and is accompanied by that same 4-note melody, but it's now more of a disconcerting rumble because the tempo has increased so much. This alien is super hard to hit, and this rumble in the background only makes the player more unnerved. But when the player successfully kills the final alien, a sense of relief and accomplishment washes over them, just before they go on to the next level to do it all over again. This cycle of urgency, panic, and then finally accomplishment and relief kept the player coming back time and time again. Though the mechanics behind this fear-inducing soundscape may seem as simple as a tempo change and sporadic high-pitched noises, the concept of a changing soundscape that matches the action that's visible on the screen was something that would become popular among future horror games as well, including Amnesia: The Dark Descent, Alien Isolation, and Resident Evil. The year is now 1980, and having just completed a text-based adventure game called Colossal Cave Adventure, Ken and Roberta Williams set out to make a text-based game of their own, called Mystery House. Having found that most text-based games did not include images, Roberta took it upon herself to draw 70 2D images that would be used for the game, including this one, which is my personal favorite. Using simple text commands, the player wanders a Victorian mansion, first in search of treasure, but things quickly become nefarious. The mansion is staffed by 7 individuals, one of which is a murderer, and after the discovery of a dead body, the player now wanders in search of the killer. This game has a knack of inducing a feeling of surprise and uncertainty within the player. You absolutely never know what's coming next. At one point, you accidentally set the dining room on fire, and you dodge a dagger that's been thrown directly at your head. The game also includes a few eerie descriptions that supplement the bare-bones images that are on the screen. When entering the basement, the player reads, "You are in a moist basement. Algae covers the walls. There is a dead body here." Though perhaps not as frightening as a Stephen King book, this text adds to the player's experience by leveraging their own imagination. The developers understood that the images lack detail, but they also understood that the player's mind is capable of building on that image with just a little nudge. This principle is used throughout Mystery House, and it's not uncommon to see developers today use a similar principle, whether it be through dark imagery where you can't really see what anything is, or just sounds that are super bizarre and make your head go, "What?" The human brain is always looking for patterns. And game developers will use this to their advantage to put their players even more on edge as their brain runs wild with possibilities. Each of these early horror games took a different approach to inducing an emotional response in the player. Real-life aspects, including physical props or a shout from your sibling or best friend, bolster a haunted house. Death Race created controversy and introduced psychological questions with its violent theme. Sound design created panic in Space Invaders. And Mystery House relied on text and the human mind to add to the game's story. Whether it be surprise, fright, or panic, these early game developers used the technology available to reach through the screen and have a tangible emotional impact on the player. And this emotional response is the foundation to any impactful horror game. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. I really appreciate all of your support. Thanks again!